Hello, and welcome to Sci-Fi Christian. I'm Ben DeBono, here to talk to you about Paradise Lost Book VIII. And I am, of course, joined by a very, very special guest this week. The reason why it's been 2 weeks since I've done a Paradise Lost video. This is Charles Benedict DeBono, born just this past Saturday, 4 days ago. And he's hanging out with me tonight. So if we wind up with some odd editing or whatnot in this video, that's probably why. But here, we'll see if we can get you for the camera there. There you go, buddy. He's number 3 for me and my wife. And if this video is a little bit darker than what I've been trying to do, I have a lamp here in my office I've been turning on to improve the lighting on these videos, but I'm not going to do that tonight because I don't want to get it into his eyes. But Charles and I have been having a good time these last few days. We've been hanging out at night. We've been reading some Shakespeare together. And tonight we are going to talk about Paradise Lost together. So it seems rather fitting that we continue his classical education. So, Book 8. Man, this is a good book. I don't know what you guys thought of this. It's not quite as accessible as Book 7, where, you know, Book 7, just, if you're familiar with the story of creation, you can follow what's happening in Book 7 very, very easily. So this isn't quite as accessible, but I think it's very, very profound. And what I want to note kind of right off the bat here is I want to make note of something that Milton is doing in books 5 through 8 that I think is very subtle and very brilliant. Maybe not super subtle, but it could easily go unnoticed. So, starting in book 5.5, you know, we go into flashback mode. And in flashback mode, we start with then the war in heaven, and that takes up the rest of book 5 and all of book 6. And then in book 7, we have the creation story, and then here in 8, we have Adam's first moments of consciousness, his meeting God, you know, the story of humanity's beginnings. Their very, very beginnings, the creation of Eve, the naming of the animals, all that stuff. Well, there you go, buddy. You have a little poopy diaper. Well, we'll hang in there for now, unless the smell gets too bad. Anyway, so book 8, we go there. What I want to note is that, look at the trajectory of those 3 books. For simplicity's sake, we'll say books 6 through 8, even though second half of book 5 does kind of begin the story in book 6. But look at the trajectory. We begin in book 6 with a contemplation of the unknowable mysteries of the supernatural. You remember how much Milton stresses in that book, how I'm describing things to you, but really they're just placeholders, you know, because I'm describing the indescribable. And so we have these almost comical, not in a funny way, but comical as in like almost cartoonish visions of angels dropping mountains on each other and stuff like that. And it's just this larger than life. It is more than our imagination can possibly handle. And Milton very intentionally goes to the edge of language to get his points across. And then in book 7, we again have this grandeur, but it's a more accessible grandeur. It's the grandeur of creation, of the world around us, of the natural, of things that by definition we can taste, touch, smell, you know, see, hear. It's very sensory. Even though there is a fair deal of mythology worked in there, as we discussed, it's very sensory what Milton does there. And now in book 8, we get to the essence of the human condition. What does it mean to be human? What are those first moments of humanity like? What is the human experience? In a sense, the very thing that all literature is about to one degree or another. Milton goes to the very core of here in this book. So there's this kind of downward trajectory, if you will, from the supernatural, inexpressible, to the expressible, but maybe not attainable, to the very intimate of humanity that is near and dear to all of us, regardless of station, belief, etc. And this downward trajectory is then going to come together in Book 9 when we have the clash of the divine conflict and the human condition brought together within the natural world. Okay? It's brilliant. What Milton is doing here is sheer brilliance. And I think it's very important we take note of that. So, going into Book 8, there's this interesting moment before we get into Adam's whole story of his moments of consciousness, where Eve gets up and leaves the conversation. And I want to read very carefully what Milton says here, because I worry that this is one of those moments where we could project onto the text our modern sensibilities and say Milton's being misogynistic, this is improper, why does he write it this way? So I want to read very carefully and then we'll discuss it a little bit. So beginning in line 40, he says, Eve, perceiving where she sat, retired in sight with lowliness majestic from her seat, and grace that one who saw to wish her stay, rose and went forth among her fruits and flowers, to visit how they prospered, bud, and bloom. Her nursery they at her coming sprung, and touched by her fair tendance gladlier grew. Yet went she not, as not with such discourse delighted, or not capable her ear of what was high. Such pleasure she reserved Adam relating, she sole auditress. Her husband the relator she preferred before the angel, and of him to ask chose rather. He, she knew, would intermix graceful digressions and solve high dispute with conjugal caresses from his lip. Not words alone pleased her. Okay. There's a number of things going on here, and none of them are misogynistic. Okay? Now, we maybe can't say the same for all of what Milton says about Eve, even in this book. But what's going on here is very subtle and very powerful if you think about it. So Milton is actually stressing order and intimacy here. The order of creation. Now, this is the part modern audiences might take objection to, but again, like we've talked about in past videos, part of what we need to do when reading literature is step out of our world and accept the world of the poem. Accept the world of the story and of the author. And only after we've done that and understood can we critique it. Now, we have to understand that part of what Milton wants us to understand about Eden is that it is well ordered. It is well governed. It is a place of peace and harmony where the rule and hierarchy is not oppressive in any way, but is a source of beauty and a source of grace and freedom. Okay? So note that Eve is not sent away, she withdraws. It is a willful submission to the hierarchy. The angel tells Adam, Adam tells Eve. Okay? And if you want to go even farther, God tells the angel to tell Adam, who tells Eve. We have a hierarchy going on here, and it is a hierarchy Eve willingly submits to because of the grace and beauty that comes to her through it. Note the eroticism in this passage. Right? Where with conjugal caresses from his lip, not words alone pleased her. That's a very erotic statement. Now, whether Milton's implying that, actual sexual activity is going on, or will go on while Adam explains it, is unknown, is slightly unclear, though that's highly possible. But certainly what he's saying is that the benefit Eve derives from hearing directly from Adam in an intimate setting is greater from her than if she stays and sits and listens to the angel. It is submitting to this hierarchical structure, this place of order, that Eve not only finds her place, not in a derogatory sense, but finds her place in a way that affirms her and draws out her beauty and her grace. Okay? Now, once we understand that, you can say, well, I don't like the idea of hierarchy. I don't agree with you on that point, regardless of what we think about gender roles, but you can go in those directions. You can say, I don't agree with what Milton has to say about the hierarchy of the family, hierarchy of men and women. whatever, or I don't like hierarchy, period. You can say all that, but understand what he's doing and why he's doing it before we just launch into a bunch of critiques. Okay? So, very beautiful passage in my view, regardless of what we might think with modern sensibilities. Very profound. All right, and then we move into Adam's story after a little bit. And I want to note here as we go on, I'm going to highlight a few different things. And that every section of this story highlights a different part of the human experience in a very profound, a very beautiful way. So the first part, we have Adam waking up, Adam's awakening. And here we have the very base layer of the human experience, the experience of self, the experience of consciousness. So starting in line 253, Adam says, "As new waked from sound asleep, soft on the flowery herb, I found me laid in balmy sweat, which with his beams the sun soon dried, and on the reeking moisture fed. Straight toward heaven in my wondering eyes I turned, and gazed awhile the ample sky, till raised by quick instinctive motion up I sprung, as thitherward endeavouring, and upright stood on my feet. About me round I saw hill, dale, and shady woods, and sunny plains, and liquid laps of murmuring streams, by these creatures that lived, and moved, or walked, or flew, birds on the branches warbling, all things smiled with fragrance, and with joy my heart overflowed. Myself I then perused, and limb by limb surveyed, and sometimes went, and sometimes ran, with supple joints as lively vigour led. But who I was, or where, or from what cause, knew not. To speak I tried, and forth spake, my tongue obeyed, and readily could name whate'er I saw. Thou sun, said I, fair light, and thou enlightened earth, so fresh and gay, ye hills and dales, ye rivers and woods and plains, and ye that live and move, fair creatures, tell if ye saw, how came I thus, how here, not of myself, by some great maker then, in goodness and in power preeminent. Tell me, how may I know him, how adore, from whom I have, that thus I move and live, and feel that I am happier than I know." You know, this is very, well, first of all, it's a very beautiful passage. And it cuts so to the core of the human condition. And it resonates with me even just reading this aloud as a new father, because thinking about like what Charles is experiencing, as like almost everything he experiences is for the first time. And it's like you take him out of the hospital and he experiences outside for the first time. And he opens his eyes and sees faces for the first time. You know, and then in the womb, even to go back even further, he hears sounds for the first time. What is that like? To never hear before, to never see anything before. And of course, we humans can only experience this vicariously, you know, through children, through contemplation, because of course we never remember any of it. Thank God. I mean, who wants to remember being born? Yeah, that would be horrible. But there would be a great mystery if we could remember what it's like to experience all those things for the first time. Even to experience confusion. I mean, can you imagine what, you know, what those first moments are like for an infant? Where the whole context of reality changes. And what Milton is able to do that is just so profound in this passage, and even beyond the little excerpt I read, is to, as best as any human can, put words to that experience. And of course it's different. Adam is not created as an infant. He's created as a man, and a man with the power of speech. So there's certainly differences, but that first moment of consciousness, of self, the first moment of thought, the first moment of seeing things, I mean, just to contemplate that, just think about what's going on there. It's a very powerful part of the human experience. And in a sense, everything else that we write about in literature flows out of that moment. That moment of consciousness, as complexity and new experiences and new ideas are added to that. But that is really, if you think about it, that is the foundation of the human experience, and therefore the foundation of literature, of the study of what it means to be human. Very profound, very profound. So then Adam goes on, and we move from that to the experience of the divine. Now, if you are not a Christian or not a theist, I'll broaden it out beyond just Christians, of course, you would say, well, that's not part of the human experience. I don't experience the divine. But there is an experience of beyondness, of grandeur, of the unknowable. And I think that's true even if you believe in a very closed naturalistic system. We might object to how much are things truly unknown, but certainly at this point in the human experience, we're a tiny little planet in an enormous universe, so even if we take our closed system of the scientific world and leave out the supernatural altogether, there is this experience of beyondness that is still there. So I do think this is part of the human condition. And here we have this played out with Adam encounters God. Now it is important to note, it is God, not the Son, who comes. And it's a very different sort of God than we've seen so far. He's much kinder and warmer to Adam than what we've experienced to date. And so this is starting in line 311. Adam says, Here had new begun my wandering, had not he who was my guide up hither from among the trees appeared, meaning God shows up, presence divine, rejoicing, but with awe and adoration at his feet I fell. Submiss he reared me, and whom thou soughtest I am, said mildly. That's a very powerful statement if you think about the experience of the divine. Whatever you believe, who thou soughtest I am. Certainly the words resonate in the Judeo-Christian tradition, of course, because of the revelation to Moses in Exodus of I am, and for Christians, the repetition of that in John's Gospel by Jesus. But even if we take it out of a Christian context, the search for the unknowable, the search for beyondness, what thou soughtest, I am. That's if you were to sum up the divine, the search for beyondness, in one statement, what is it like to encounter the end of that search? There you have it. And again, we have Milton just condensing this powerful portion of the human experience down to just that. So anyway, God goes on within Adam's dialogue. Author of all this thou seest, above or round about thee or beneath this paradise I give thee, count it thine, to till and keep, and of the fruit to eat. Of every tree that in the garden grows, eat freely with glad heart, fear here no dearth. But of the tree whose opposition brings knowledge of good and ill, which I have set, the pledge of thy obedience and thy faith amid the garden by the tree of life, remember what I warn thee. Shun to taste, and shun the bitter consequence, for know the day thou eatest thereof, my sole command transgressed, inevitably thou shalt die. From that day mortal, in this happy state shalt lose, expelled from hence into a world of woe and sorrow. So much here. I mean, first of all, I don't want to miss this. Again, the introduction is repeated. Again, we are not allowed to forget that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is warned against. And lest we have any thought at this point in the poem that Adam and Eve are ignorant, here it is out of Adam's own mouth that he knows not to do this, that God directly spoke to him, and he now repeats it back to Raphael. So there's no ambiguity there. But I mean, to think about this, that Adam's experience of beyondness, of the divine, is the opposite of ours. He begins with God, with the end of the quest, and then loses it. So that then all those other elements of the divine that precede the end are brought to him. Death, woe, sorrow, all of that. Now, of course, he isn't there yet in the story, but again, Milton is contemplating the human experience, and he begins with this contemplation of what does it mean to lose God? To find God, but to lose God. And the fact is that for us it's the opposite. We have lost God and to find God. We begin without the knowledge and we seek the knowledge. But still, even though it's in the reverse, Milton just cuts to the core here of the experience of the divine. Very, very powerful. We have the experience of nature then, the naming of animals. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. But the experience of the natural world, the experience of the world around them, the experience of work is within there, of responsibility, of authority. And so even now we're starting to build on that core foundation of the moment of consciousness. But that's very much built upon that. You are conscious of this animal that then you name. Consciousness precedes all of this. Consciousness precedes the quest for the divine. And so Milton presents that foundation so succinctly and then builds upon it. And then the next one I want to spend a little more time on is the experience of loss and incompleteness. And this is where we get the request for Eve. And I'm going to read an excerpt here again, but I also want you to note that, again, I think we land on one of Milton's critiques of Trinitarian theology here, or at least I think so. So listen to the part I read, and then we'll kind of discuss the Trinitarian part. So starting in line 412, Adam says, to attain, this is Adam talking to God, to attain the height and depth of thy eternal ways, all human thoughts come short. Again, experience of the divine, to realize that even having found the end, to find the end is not comprehension in the quest for the divine. To find the end is to be satisfied with the gap between you and the divine, to experience it in such a way that the quest is over, but the mystery is not. Very powerful. All human thoughts come short, supreme of things. Thou in thyself art perfect, and in thee is no deficiency found. Not so is man, but in degree, the cause of his desire by conversation with his like to help of solace his defects. No need that thou shouldst propagate, already infinite, and through all numbers absolute, though one. But man by number is to manifest its single imperfection, and beget, like of his like, his image multiplied in unity defective, which requires collateral love. And dearest amity, thou in thy secrecy, although alone, best with thyself accompanied, seekest not social communication, yet so pleased canst raise thy creature to what height thou wilt, of union or communion deified. I, by conversing, cannot these erect from prone, nor in their ways complacence find. So, first of all, we have the Trinitarian critique, is that Milton is in essence saying that for God to exist in Trinity would be to admit some kind of defect in himself, to admit that he's not one, to admit that he does not exist as an absolute infinite, that he has need of others. Now, of course, there are any number of objections to this in Christian orthodoxy, perhaps most profoundly in Aquinas' treatise on God, in the Summa Theologiae. But certainly Milton is touching on that here. Again, the point right now with this analysis is not to have a Trinitarian debate, but to point out what Milton's trying to get at, regardless of whether we agree or disagree. But then even more so, I think even more to the point is this contrast then between Adam's experience, or God's experience of completeness in unity, and Adam's experience of deficiency in oneness. That the human experience is such that it cannot be done alone. It requires some type of otherness. It requires some type of other self. I mean, why do we desire babies? Why do we desire spouses? Why do we desire friends? It's because that is essential to the human experience, that sense of loss that occurs when we are alone. And even those of us who are dedicated introverts and enjoy a great deal of time alone experience that need at a very profound level, right? I think even those who are truly alone and choose voluntarily to remain that way experience that need. And that need is often expressed through pain. It's expressed through the very unwillingness to seek out companionship as a result of any number of factors, whether it be mental illness or damage from past relationships or what have you, but the experience is very much there. You know, the need for others, for something beyond the self, but not just something beyond the self in the way that the contemplation of the divine comes, but in the way that the contemplation of otherness comes, in that we want otherness, but otherness that is of our nature. You know, we want to be with those who share in the human experience, who understand human needs and desires. Very profoundly stated. And I think regardless of what Milton is or isn't saying about the Trinity, the comparison is very well taken, or the contrast is very well taken and very, very appropriate. And then the final part then of this dialogue, where we get into the human experience, is the experience of love and the experience of beauty and the praise of Eve. And so this is beginning in line 530. Here passion first I felt, commotion strange. Oh, there's what a wonderfully succinct way of talking about expressing the way that it feels to first experience of feminine beauty. Commotion strange. You know, there's words to put in the mouths of many 13-year-old boys, am I right? In all enjoyments else superior and unmoved, here only weak against the charm of beauty's powerful glance. Or nature failed in me, and left some part, not proof enough such object to sustain. Or from my side, subducting, took perhaps more than enough. At least on her bestowed too much of ornament in outward shew, elaborate, of inward less exact. For well I understood in the prime end of nature, her the inferior in the mind. Sorry, ladies, again, you know, let's give Milton a little grace here. And inward faculties which most excel, in outward also her, resembling less his image who made both, and less expressing the character of that dominion given. Or ever other creatures, yet when I approach her loveliness, so absolute she seems, and in herself complete so well to know her own, that what she wills to do or say seems wisest, virtuous, discreetest, best. All higher knowledge in her presence falls. Degraded wisdom in discourse with her loses discountenancent, and like folly shows authority and reason on her weight, as one intended first, not after made, occasionally. And to consummate all, greatness of mind and nobleness their seat, built in her loveliest, and created awe about her as a guard, angelic placed. All right, so if we want to jump on Milton for saying that women are intellectually inferior, okay, we can do that. But let's not forget that the thrust of this passage is one of awe, of reverence, of power, dare I say of worship, not divine worship, of course, but note the way that Adam's experiences of nature go inward, go upward to the divine, go outward to the world around him. And then here, even though he is higher in the hierarchy, so they go downward to that created from him, the feminine, it is, in some sense, his strongest language of praise, that he sees here in that which was created after him and from him something that is worthier than him. Very, very powerful. And I think regardless of what we want to say about Milton's take on gender, again, I think that there's, for the record, I don't think women are intellectually inferior or anything like that. But he is touching very much on the human experience of feminine beauty. And that is part of the human experience, that experience of beauty, that experience of love, of, in a sense, a pre-eroticness that occurs here. That the awe and reverence that comes when you first come face to face with a beautiful woman and recognize her as that. Recognize her as a beautiful woman. Very powerful. Very key part of the human experience. And one that we should not discount what Milton says about it just because we don't like everything he says about it. Similarly to what we just saw at the Trinity. I don't like what he says about the Trinity, but I like a lot of what he has to say about the human experience of loss and isolation that he sets up with his faulty Trinitarian theology. Okay? So very powerful passage. And then the final thing I want to mention in this book is, starting in line 640, very briefly, we have from, or maybe it's 639, I don't know, from Raphael, where he says, "Stand fast. To stand or fall, free in thine own arbitrament it lies, perfect within, no outward aid require, and all temptation to transgress, repel." So we end this book with this final statement that you can do this, Adam. You are not lacking in anything. You're not lacking in knowledge. You're not lacking in warnings. You're not lacking in ability. You're not lacking in anything you need to resist this temptation. And with that, we'll move on to Book 9, where the temptation narrative will play itself out in all of its tragic glory. And I will see you then, hopefully next week. I'm not going to make any promises just because, hey, life with a new baby is what it is. But maybe Carol's will be back for that one too now. But for now, I am Ben DeBono. This is the Sci-Fi Christian Paradise Lost Book VIII. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye.